Imagine looking in the mirror, watching yourself breathe, speak, move, and yet feeling like none of it actually belongs to you. For countless people, this isn't a sci-fi glitch but an unsettling part of lived reality. Recent reviews show that brief episodes of depersonalization or derealization are extremely common, ranking just after anxiety and low mood. But for about 1% of the population, these sensations persist and develop into a clinical disorder. So why would the brain make the world feel unreal in the first place? Is it a survival trick that overshoots, or something else entirely? So how common is this glitch, really? When most people first hear about depersonalization or derealization, they assume it must be rare, something unusual you'd only read about in a clinical manual. But research shows that this glitch-like sensation is much more common than expected, both in fleeting moments and in persistent forms that count as a full disorder. The clearest way to understand it is to separate two different questions. First, how many people ever feel brief detachment from themselves or their surroundings? Second, how many live with a lasting version that disrupts daily life? Studies suggest that transient depersonalization and derealization have lifetime rates anywhere from about 26% to as high as 74%. In other words, most people will encounter at least one passing episode under stress, exhaustion, or heightened emotion. By contrast, depersonalization-derealization disorder, the clinical condition where those feelings recur and interfere with functioning, appears at around 1% in the general population, with different studies ranging roughly between 0.8% and 1.9%. That gap between fleeting episodes and the full diagnosis is essential. Ordinary lapses in focus, like forgetting part of a walk home or zoning out during a lecture, come and go without making you doubt reality itself. But depersonalization and derealization symptoms sit further along the same spectrum. When they persist, people may feel that their reflection in a mirror doesn't belong to them, or that the room around them looks staged or artificial. The brain fails to reset, leaving those distortions stuck on repeat. Here's a quick way to check the difference for yourself. Have you ever felt detached from your body or surroundings during intense stress? Most people would answer yes, but do those feelings return again and again, lasting long enough to interfere with your life? If the answer there is also yes, that's where the line into disorder becomes relevant. Researchers have also found important demographic patterns. Adolescents and young adults tend to report higher rates of symptoms, with surveys of students showing that 11–12% describe significant depersonalization or derealization experiences. Women and men appear equally likely to meet criteria, suggesting this isn't a gender-skewed phenomenon, but a shared vulnerability across populations. Thinking about prevalence this way dissolves the myth that dissociation lives only at the margins. When a symptom appears in surveys across dozens of cultures, at rates surpassing many other recognized conditions, it's not obscure, it's mainstream. For the majority, episodes fade quickly. But for the millions worldwide who struggle with persistent symptoms, this isn't a momentary oddity, but a lasting alteration to the way consciousness feels. These numbers also matter because they shape how the public frames mental health. If detachment was seen as an exotic disorder, few people would feel comfortable admitting to it. Instead, recognizing that brief episodes happen to a large part of the population shows that the capacity for these distortions is built into normal brain function. It doesn't mean something is broken when you experience them. It means the mind is drawing on a mechanism nearly everyone carries, though for a minority it turns from fleeting to entrenched. That framing also helps clinicians. For too long, depersonalization-derealization disorder has hovered in a gray zone, too common to ignore yet often dismissed as so rare that doctors don't screen for it. Updated prevalence ranges suggest otherwise. Psychologists now describe it as the third most frequently reported symptom cluster, after anxiety and depressed mood. Even if only about 1% qualify for a clinical diagnosis, that still reflects a burden comparable to several better recognized psychiatric conditions. Ignoring it risks mislabeling patients, delaying treatment, or leaving people confused about why their symptoms don't fit categories like panic disorder or psychosis. It's useful to picture the phenomenon on a spectrum. On one end are familiar slips of attention, brief zoning out episodes that nearly everyone knows. In the middle stretch are more intense spells of feeling unreal that still resolve quickly in most people. And at the far end are individuals whose brains seem caught in the pattern, with depersonalization or derealization intruding for long stretches every day. Viewing it as a gradient highlights continuity rather than a sharp divide, and may help people who struggle see that they are far from isolated in the experience. This recognition also has practical consequences for treatment. When health systems acknowledge that persistent depersonalization or derealization is not rare, they adapt accordingly. Clinicians become more confident in asking about it. Intake questionnaires start to include direct questions about feelings of unreality. And professionals in primary care, who sometimes mistake the symptoms for psychosis or substance effects, learn to identify it as a distinct profile that requires its own approach. Patients benefit when their experiences are contextualized instead of dismissed. Beyond numbers, prevalence reframing reshapes how people understand their own glitch-like moments. Instead of seeing them as unexplainable, they can recognize them as a well-documented part of human psychology, lying on a continuum from everyday detachment to clinical disorder. Realizing how crowded that spectrum is interrupts the stigma of rarity. You are not the only person feeling estranged from your own voice, your reflection, or your environment. Millions of others report it too, whether only in passing or as a major feature of their mental health journey. All of this naturally leaves one question lingering. If temporary or lasting estrangement from self and surroundings is so widespread, what is the brain actually doing during those episodes? And why would a system designed to keep us grounded in reality sometimes mute or distort that very sense of reality? What the brain is actually doing during these episodes? Why would a protective brain nudge you away from feeling fully inside your own body or environment? The surprising answer lies not in damage, but in how the brain regulates threat. On the surface, this seems paradoxical. A core role of the nervous system is to take in sensory input and produce a seamless sense of reality. Yet in depersonalization and derealization episodes, that integration falters. Instead of firming the boundary between self and world, the system blurs it. Instead of attaching familiar emotional weight to experience, it strips it away. At first, this looks like malfunction, but evidence suggests it is more like a defensive recalibration. The brain normally stitches sensory signals into a unified picture that feels both accurate and personally owned. You look at a tree, and the input is not just raw shape or color. It has texture, distance, and familiarity layered in, yielding a secure sense of this is a tree in my world. When episodes occur, that certainty slips. Research using neuroimaging shows that connections between sensory processing areas and higher-order integration hubs weaken. In those moments, the data still reaches the brain, but the usual step of tagging it with belonging and meaning does not complete. In practical terms, the information is there but feels hollow. People describe it like watching a vivid movie where the soundtrack has been muted. The content plays fine, but the emotional channel that makes it real has been stripped out. That hollowing out effect shows up in imaging scans as reduced communication between regions that normally bind perception with emotion. One reliable pattern across recent studies anchors these findings. Increased activity in prefrontal executive areas combined with reduced activity in limbic emotional circuits. This prefrontal hyperactivation, limbic hypoactivation profile has been described in multiple reviews. It suggests that rather than shutting down, the brain doubles down on control in one area while dampening another. The result is a lopsided state, heightened self-monitoring with underpowered emotional coloring. Certain brain regions appear repeatedly in this research. The ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, known for supervising responses, the temporoparietal junction, which helps tie together perspectives of body and space, the insula, a center for internal bodily awareness, and the precuneus, tied to self-imagery, all show disrupted function or connectivity during depersonalization derealization episodes. The specific mix may vary by person, but the overall theme holds. Brain nodes that map the self and its environment stop integrating in the usual way. Why would the nervous system adopt this stance? Stress and trauma provide the functional clue. In overwhelming situations, severe fear, emotional overload, exhaustion, the brain sometimes chooses detachment to limit impact. The analogy often used is a circuit breaker. Power doesn't fail by accident, it is deliberately tripped to prevent worse damage. In dissociation, sensory input continues, but the connective emotional circuits go offline to reduce risk of panic or collapse. This protective hypothesis explains familiar subjective effects. The sense of a glass wall between yourself and the world lines up with perception remaining intact, but emotional resonance stripped. Feeling like words or movements do not belong to you reflects motor signals traveling normally, but without integration into ownership networks. What looks like a nervous system breaking is more like one deploying emergency safety features. The catch is that the strategy can become overactive, persisting far beyond its usefulness. These shifts also unfold over longer timescales than many people expect. Seizures or stroke changes show as sudden, dramatic spikes or losses of activity. By contrast, depersonalization and derealization appear in scans as sustained misalignments. Certain pathways stay quieter than usual, while executive circuits maintain unusual levels of activity. That persistence explains why some episodes drag on for days or weeks. The brain has locked into what it senses as the safest mode, and the harder a person panics about the sensations, the more the prefrontal systems clamp down. This also clarifies why grounding strategies have a chance to work. When the brain is withholding integration, it effectively waits for signs that it can release protective control. Strong sensory experiences, sharp cold, identifiable sounds, or describing detail in the environment provide direct evidence that no present danger exists. These inputs press on the same systems that have been muted, giving the brain reasons to turn off its cautionary stance. Over time, repeated reassurance reactivates the circuits that reconnect sensory data with belonging. Reframing dissociation as a safety function, not a defect, has more than academic value. Many people experiencing these episodes jump to catastrophic conclusions, that their minds are breaking or reality itself cannot be trusted. But identifying dissociation as a crude protection device redirects interpretation. The pain of the symptom remains, but the meaning changes. It is not evidence of collapse, it is proof of a nervous system overshooting its job to preserve functioning. That distinction provides hope rather than fear. Clinicians who explain it this way often see relief in patients. Instead of being trapped in cycles of fearing insanity, individuals can understand that an overvigilant protector is in play. The metaphor is less about broken wiring and more about a seatbelt locked too tightly around the body, designed to help in emergencies, but uncomfortable and restrictive when stuck. Recognizing overuse allows better strategies for loosening that hold. Looking across the findings, the overall image grows consistent. Depersonalization and derealization feel extreme and destabilizing, yet their neurological footprint matches a survival tactic. Increased executive control, reduced emotional resonance, and dropped integration across body and world maps combine into a defensive mode. It keeps a person functional when the system anticipates overwhelm, though at a heavy cost to groundedness. That reframe doesn't erase the suffering. Feeling split from yourself or cut off from your surroundings is draining, often frightening, and sometimes persistent. But knowing that the pattern is not random chaos makes a difference. It returns coherence to an experience that otherwise feels inexplicable. At its core, dissociation is the nervous system's attempt to hold the line under pressure, even if it ends up misfiring in everyday life. And once you understand what the brain is doing mechanically, another question comes forward. Does the altered state affect how you disconnect from yourself versus how you disconnect from the outside world? Depersonalization versus derealization, spotting the difference. Have you ever tried to sort out whether the disconnection feels like it's coming from inside you or from the world outside? That's the practical difference between depersonalization and derealization. They both sit under the same diagnostic umbrella, but each highlights a slightly different kind of unreal. Depersonalization describes the self feeling disconnected. Derealization describes the environment feeling altered or staged. Clinicians often see both symptoms occur together, and the DSM groups them into a single disorder only when they persist long enough to cause distress and disruption. Still, distinguishing them can give you useful language for describing just what part of reality seems to have slipped. Depersonalization is about detachment from your own experience. You go through motions, walking, talking, brushing your teeth, but it feels like your body is on borrowed time, like you're observing from a step back rather than inhabiting yourself. Thoughts, movements, even your voice can feel oddly foreign, as if they belong to someone else. People often compare this to running on autopilot or playing a video game character that moves correctly but never feels fused with you. The core thread is that me doesn't quite reach its usual sense of ownership. Derealization flips the focus outward. The world itself appears intact but oddly artificial, as if wrapped in a pane of glass. You notice sharp details, streetlights, faces, buildings, but the sense of depth or authenticity drops away. Some describe it as standing inside a movie set where everything is visually normal yet emotionally flat. You can touch objects, but your connection to them isn't convincing, as though the coffee cup in your hand belongs to a simulation. The environment feels stage-like rather than lived in. Both of these modes can overlap during the same episode. You might feel detached from your inner voice while your room simultaneously looks dreamlike. But a rough dividing question can cut through the confusion. Does it feel like I don't feel real, or does it feel like the world doesn't feel real? That phrasing offers a quick tool for self-checking when symptoms blur. Certain metaphors sharpen the difference. Depersonalization, floating above your body, lagging behind your movements, or viewing life through a fogged windshield. Derealization, seeing familiar places as cardboard cutouts, sensing reality filtered through glass or moving through a dreamlike fog. Condensed to their simplest form, one is I don't feel real, the other is this place doesn't feel real. Those short, punchy images capture the contrast more clearly than long lists. Memory offers another quiet clue. In depersonalization, your own experiences may feel oddly unanchored. Events happened, but they don't feel stored as genuinely yours. In derealization, the problem tilts outward. your recall of the world has a muted, dreamlike quality, as if memories pass through a haze filter. Nothing is lost, but the texture of remembering feels skewed. Knowing this distinction sometimes helps people label odd memory complaints that otherwise seem hard to pin down. The emotional fallout differs too. When self-detachment dominates, panic often turns inward, fears of losing identity, disappearing, or going insane. With world detachment, anxiety shifts outward, worries that the universe is broken, that nothing will ever feel real again. Neither set of worries means the experience is permanent, but spotting which side you're on allows coping strategies to fit better. For self-detachment, focusing on bodily sensation, breath, touch, movement, tends to ground you back. For world detachment, emphasizing constancy in your surroundings, naming objects, checking context, can steady you. Clinicians emphasize that most people don't experience clean categories. Human minds are messy, and depersonalization and derealization mingle easily. Instead of expecting textbook boundaries, it helps to treat these terms as tools for mapping the texture of your symptoms. They offer language where otherwise there might just be confusion, and language alone can sometimes ease fear. So the practical takeaway is straightforward. When unreality strikes, ask yourself one quick question: am I questioning me or the world? That brief self-assessment can cut through panic, anchor your description, and give you a starting point for what to do next. And recognizing that both forms often travel together reminds you that none of this is beyond understanding. It's simply part of how the brain copes under strain. And that raises another complication. If inner and outer disconnection are already hard to separate, what happens when daily life itself adds extra layers of unreality? Our environments today challenge the brain in new ways, blending physical and virtual experiences until the boundary between them can feel blurred. Why digital life makes this worse? Here's something modern life has introduced that older generations never faced: long stretches of time where our senses and attention are drawn almost entirely into a screen. That immersion doesn't create dissociation from scratch, but it can make certain people more likely to feel detached afterward. Think about doom scrolling. You open your phone for a few updates, and half an hour later you're still swiping. The feed trains your attention to move fast, jumping from text to photos to video without pause. When you finally put the screen down, your body and environment can feel strangely muted by comparison. It's like stepping out of a loud, brightly lit arcade into a quiet street. That sharp shift in stimulation is brief, but for someone already prone to dissociative symptoms, the unreal sensation can stick. If that resonates with you, one practical step is to track whether long scroll sessions tend to come just before your own episodes. Virtual reality amplifies this further. Headsets are designed to trick the brain into treating a false environment as if it were real. They adjust vision, sound, even motion cues until presence feels convincing. And research backs this up. VR studies show that leaving a headset session can temporarily lower the sense of presence in the actual world, a reflection of how immersion bends perception. For most people, that odd feeling resolves quickly. But for those already sensitive to dissociation, the adjustment can be harder, and the false-real boundary doesn't snap back right away. The same mimicked sensory distortions that make VR engaging are in vulnerable brains, the same ones that resemble derealization symptoms. This isn't speculation. Reviews have noted that heavy engagement with immersive digital environments, from social media to online gaming, correlates with more reports of dissociative complaints, especially in those already at risk. Importantly, this doesn't mean digital tools directly cause depersonalization derealization disorder. The current evidence is more cautious. Immersive use seems linked with higher likelihood of symptoms in susceptible people, not guaranteed outcomes in everyone. Still, the overlap is real enough that clinicians now ask about media habits when evaluating dissociation. Mechanisms can explain why. Our nervous systems expect sensory input at a regular pace, but fast, layered digital input overwhelms that rhythm. Imagine walking steadily down a path, then suddenly trying to balance on a moving ramp. Your balance doesn't fail, but it flickers. Digital platforms shift attention in that same jarring way. After hours of split-second updates and visual stimulation, the return to slow, unfiltered reality can feel oddly hollow, like a downgrade. That subtle mismatch is one seed of derealization. A second mechanism involves how the brain manages boundaries. Ordinarily, it keeps inner thoughts separate from the outer world, but screens blend the two. You think, you act, the environment responds instantly, whether through a social comment or a VR movement. Over time, that collapsing of inner and outer experience may dull the distinction. And that weaker boundary is exactly what depersonalization and derealization rely on, losing the sense of what is me versus what is out there. It's important to stress that this isn't weakness. Just as eyes strain in low light, attention and grounding strain under overstimulation. If you've ever felt hazy, unreal, or detached after a long night online, that doesn't mean you lack resilience. It means your brain reacted predictably to its environment. These moments aren't flaws, they're byproducts of systems working under stretches of strain. Generational trends highlight this more clearly. Young adults who grew up with constant connectivity report dissociation not just after trauma but after daily habits, binge streaming, juggling constant notifications, or gaming late into the night. For many, Unreality isn't an occasional event, but part of the background of ordinary life. No single app or device is responsible. The issue is cumulative density, the brain toggling between immersive states, so often that ordinary perception loses some of its texture. Yet not everyone experiences it the same way. Vulnerabilities, stress levels, personality traits, sleep quality, other mental health conditions, all shape whether digital immersion simply feels tiring or tips into dissociation. That variability is why researchers view digital life as an amplifier rather than a cause. VR headsets, marathon gaming, or scrolling sprees won't push everyone into detachment. But they do heighten the chance for those already sensitive to it, and that's the key difference. Real-world accounts underline how fast this can happen. Some people describe a single late scroll session, paired with exhaustion, making the next morning feel dreamlike. The detachment isn't fleeting, it lingers into work or class, leaving basic routines scattered by a thin fog. These aren't edge cases. They're common enough that the statistical link between high digital use and dissociative symptoms fits the everyday reality many describe. At first, it may feel daunting. What can you do when the very tools most of us rely on encourage these shifts? But the encouraging takeaway is that the process is understandable and therefore manageable. If unreality arises after long immersion, it is the brain playing defense against too much stimulation. That predictability makes strategies clearer.